Hi, I'm Ted Nelson with another serving of Computers for Cynics. Today's proposition, it all went wrong at Xerox PARC. For the first 6 minutes, I'll tell you the standard story, and then we'll get down to business. First, let's start with the legend. The people at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, called Xerox PARC, are treated as gods. In the standard computer history, they created the modern computer world as we know it. They took the bad old geeky computer with its keyboard commands and the bad old text editing programs with their keyboard commands and built instead a magic toy shop. They gave us mouse pointing, multiple windows on the screen, pull-down menus, applications running in separate windows, word processing with fancy fonts, sometimes called desktop publishing. Virtually every computer in the world now has this structure, usually called the modern GUI or graphical user interface. But many other graphical interfaces are possible, so let's give proper credit and call it what it is, the PARC user interface, or PUI. Prehistory, Xerox and how it grew. Once there was a company called Haloid that made photographic supplies, chemical and photographic paper, but in the 1930s they bought a patent on a process that would make pictures by static electricity, with no chemicals or special paper. After 2 decades of development, they brought out their magical picture machine, the 914 copier, and they changed their company name to Xerox. The 914 copier revolutionized the world. Nobody expected all the copies that people would make. So throughout the 60s, Xerox was wallowing in money as if there was no tomorrow, meaning that they were free to spend a lot on R&D rather than paid in taxes. History of Xerox PARC. Some smart guys at Xerox managed to set up a futurist research center. Xerox PARC was built in California, partly so upper management would bother them as little as possible. A key department head was Bob Taylor, who had been the computer funding guy at the Defense Department. He went cherry-picking among computer guys he knew, hiring them away from universities and companies. They were idealists and enthusiasts and hard workers. Taylor was determined to build some kind of future, some new kind of future, but he wasn't sure exactly what it was. I'll know it when I see it, he said, and cherry-picked the ideas his people came up with. And now for the first PUI. The guys at PARC had been forbidden to buy computers, so they began by building their own. They built a lot of little computers called Altos, little by the standards of those days, but putting far more power in front of the user than anyone had seen before. The Alto was hot and fast and could have fancy fonts on the screen. By and by, the Alto software package included icons, desktop, wastebasket, mouse, apps with undo, and strange operations called cut and paste. Word processing with fonts instead of the clunky letters traditional for computers. You saw Times Roman and Courier and fancy script fonts. It printed out the same way. This was called WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get, meaning what you see on the screen is what you get when you print it out. A slogan actually from a transvestite comedian named Flip Wilson. And this was the first PUI. And Bob Taylor saw it and pronounced it good. Outside the walls of PARC in the 1970s with our noses pressed to the plane, we computer guys heard a lot about the Alto package and seethed in jealousy and hope. We heard of it mostly from PARC's great publicist, Alan Kay, a great programmer, but also a great talker. At conferences everywhere, he talked about what PARC was doing. I must have seen it spiel 5 times. After Alan might begin by showing a video of some child using an Alto, pointing out drawing with a mouse, he told us the child would soon be a programmer. He told us that his small talk language would let any child program, including graphics, music, and who knows what else. We believed it. Thousands saw Alan's demos at conferences, and the lucky ones got invited to go to take tours at PARC. I got mine in 1975. We all wondered, when would this stuff come out? It took a long time. The PUI gets out of PARC. Climax 1. Xerox screwed up trying to market the PUI. They've refused to sell the Alto, and the PUI machine they tried to sell, the Xerox Star, was much too expensive. And they knew they were running out of time because their patents would soon expire, and the copiers and printers would flood in from Japan. Having spent untold millions developing this new package, the PUI world, they wanted some payback, and they didn't know how to market it. So they went to a guy who might. Steve Jobs got to walk through PARC in 1979, and see the Alto. He actually made Xerox pay for the privilege of showing it to him. And Jobs became fired up and said, I can sell this. First, Jobs led a team to develop Apple's first PUI machine. It was called the Lisa, and it cost $10,000. It was a flop. So then Jobs led the Macintosh project, Apple's second PUI machine, and he insisted on the lowest possible cost. The Macintosh marketing rollout in 1984 began with a spectacular commercial on the Super Bowl directed by Ridley Scott, which presented the Macintosh as a great liberation of mankind, and this time the PUI caught on big. Soon Bill Gates started his own PUI, called Microsoft Windows, and the PUI fight was on between Apple and Microsoft, continuing to the present day. Climax 2, how text systems got out of PARC. There were two important text development software projects at PARC. The first of the great PARC text projects was the editing program with all the fonts, which everyone loved. It was called Bravo by Charles Simoni. By and by, Simoni left PARC and took his Bravo project with fonts to Microsoft, and it became, ta-da, Microsoft Word. Simoni guided the growth of Microsoft Word for a decade, building it up to Microsoft Office. Meanwhile, the program for making all the different printers work with all the fonts was called Interpress by John Warnock, and by Warnock too left PARC, and Interpress became, ta-da, the PostScript language, which Warnock managed to get into laser printers everywhere. PostScript evolved into the PDF format, which is widely used for frozen text content with fonts. Now, let's talk about the downside of the PUI. This is no longer the standard story. I have to be careful what I say. I want to stay friendly with people like Alan Kay and Larry Tesler, but somebody has to say these things. PARC has had so much fawning adulation over the years, it's time to balance the story. Downside, the social aspect. There was a lot of friction between PARC and the rest of the computer world. Taylor hired away a lot of top people, for example, the main guys of Doug Engelbart's lab, breaking up his team. We were at dinner with Doug a few years ago when Doug actually wept at his people's desertion and what he felt was Taylor's betrayal. Doug's former sponsor, Bob Taylor, turning around and spurning his vision of deep cooperative work so important for the world. Here was another irritant. Alan Kay would generally begin his spiel by saying that PARC had the top 5% of computer people. You can imagine how the rest of us liked hearing that, being told we were inferior peasants. The press continually speaks of PARC as a wonderful, carefree playpen for free-living, liberated technical guys. Well, when I got the PARC tour, I found the atmosphere very unpleasant, indeed very abrasive and aggressive. Was it just me? I don't think so. Downside, a fig leaf. The icons and windows were just a fig leaf on the conventional operating system. Directories were not called folders, but this did not change them or their structure or hierarchy in the slightest. Using icons, you could still do some of the standard functions. They'd found an exact graphical way to command the operations, create new file and directory, move file and directory, delete file and directory, and these operations were a little safer than in Unix, where one character incorrect would destroy everything. But otherwise, they changed the operating system in no way whatever. Consider the wonderful undo command. That was only in applications. There is no undo in the PUI operating system. They didn't change the operating system in any way. They just hid it. Downside. The interface program was finished. You couldn't program the views. Example, your program couldn't draw a line between the contents of one window and the contents of another. See transpointing windows on the web. Example, there was no zoom. The screen was locked to paper thinking a fixed size, though ideas have no fixed size. Downside, what they took away. Xerox PARC changed the operating system in no way whatever except for what they took away. They took away the right to program. Unix shell scripts, invented by Frenchman Louis Pouzin, encouraged casual programming and easily led up to the C language, which was serious programming. All that was taken away, and no, Smalltalk did not come out for the kiddies or in any form that let you change the PUI. Downside, application programs. PARC created the application, but an application is an enclosed file. You can't mix or match what applications do any more than you can mix or match the traits of your previous boyfriends or girlfriends. You can't change the interfaces of applications just as you can't change the interface of the operating system. You can't script the movement of content or pieces. Applications were cattle pens. You go from application to application like a cow in a chute. So does your data. You are a prisoner of each one in turn. Downside, they dumbed down electronic documents, replacing structure with fonts. In Doug Engelbart's text system, the first text system, text could be overlaid with connections. They threw that out. And they stuck to the standard computer tradition of one file equals one document. Do-de-do. In other words, they simulated paper, the paper dime, but it was dumbed down paper. You couldn't write on it. They simulated paper under glass. You couldn't rearrange it freely on the page. You could only rearrange it with side-to-side tab settings. You couldn't protect part of a document. Why not? You just want to work an area. Can't you protect the rest of it? No, they extended the conventional file model from Unix, where you could protect a whole document, but not part of it. Again, this was just a fig leaf covering the conventional operating system and file structure. And it had this locked size, 72 DPI matched to your WYSIWYG printer. Where did that come from? Why, 18th century typesetting. In summary, the PUI dumbed down the computer to a paper simulator. What PARC did was make a machine for secretaries, and not even for high-level secretaries, for typists. So they wouldn't have to type a document repeatedly from scratch, just put in the changes. And the other low-level secretary functions were file a paper document, move a document or folder, throw away a document or folder. All those they did by icons. Duh! What more could you possibly want? Downside. Now we get to cut and paste. I learned in high school that the craft of writing consists mainly of rewriting, and rewriting consists mainly of rearrangement. After you've written something, it's usually in the wrong order. You study it, then you cut it apart into separate pieces of paper, then you arrange the pieces of paper in the right order, adding or replacing text as you need to. This can take some time. You may have the pieces of text lying around on your desk or your bed or the floor. Then when you're all done, you attach the pieces in the right order with staples or clear tape or often with paste. And for hundreds of years, this process was called cut and paste. It was used by the great author Tolstoy. The novelist Balzac had a sharp knife on a lanyard around his neck to cut up his manuscript for rearrangement. I've also been told the great chemist Mendeleev moved slips of paper around representing the chemical elements until he found the periodic table. And in my first salaried job at my hometown newspaper, my first task in the morning was to fill the paste pots for the reporters, who would come in and type their stories, then cut them up and rearrange them. Did PARC give us a good way to move the pieces of a document around on the screen to find the right order? No! They gave us an abominable editing mechanism, propagandistically hidden behind the former terminology. The abominable mechanism is the hidey hole where you put something you want to move, and it's called the clipboard. And hiding something on the clipboard has since 1984, when the Macintosh came out, been called cut. Then you choose where this one piece goes and blurp it out, and this blurp out action has been, since 1984, been called paste. Not only did PARC take away the fundamental method of reorganization and give us a hidey hole instead, but they gave that hidey hole the name of the previous method, which in true Orwellian style has made people forget. Note that the Macintosh laid it on us in 1984, the Orwellian year. Now, this twisting of the previous terminology for an entirely different function was perpetrated by Larry Tesler, who was one of the nicest guys I know. As the Christians say, hate the sin but love the sinner. I've been corresponding with Larry, no time to read his beautiful reply. He thinks old-fashioned cut and paste is a complex method for professionals and researchers, and that ordinary people don't need anything better. I'll be putting his beautifully written reply in the next edition of Geeks. Now, the PARC people said they tested the PUI. Whom did they test it on? I believe secretaries and Xerox upper management who didn't know any better. Did they test it on people with vast amounts of content to organize? I don't think so. Did they test it on historians, great writers, great novelists, or maybe you who are trying to manage multiple threads of narrative and connection? I don't think so. Did they test it on super secretaries like paralegals who have to keep track of profuse connections, super secretaries like administrative assistants who live on an item storm of incoming demands? I don't think so. And those people are still screwed, as are you and I. Winding up, the Xerox PARC dumbed down was about mimicking the past. They called their constructs metaphors, believing that everything had to resemble the past and not imagining they could create new unfettered constructs. They dumbed down the computer, making it a paper simulator, and in a Faustian bargain, gave us the sensual pleasures of fonts in return for giving up any forms of connection or organization. They threw away Engelbart's work on structure and collaboration, which did not fit on paper. In order to sell printers, they threw away the universe. Thank you.